brand new study, a meta-analysis of randomized trials, shows that eating red meat improves glucose and insulin markers and doesn't worsen inflammation. While this is probably no surprise for people eating low-carb diets high in meat, it actually was a surprise to the authors. And I want to talk about this because that's what makes this study so important. I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at dietdoctor.com, and I wrote an article about this study at our website, dietdoctor.com. What's so interesting about this is the authors in their introduction say they hypothesized that when they looked at all the randomized controlled trials of eating red meat, that they would find it worsens glucose and insulin and worsens inflammation. But that's exactly the opposite of what they found. So this highlights so many different things that I think are important. One, transparency by the authors, that they disclosed their hypotheses and their bias. Two, that they followed through with the study and the results, even though the results were opposite of what they felt. And three, the importance of randomized controlled trials to inform our scientific mindset, basically. So I think it's interesting to say, well, why did they hypothesize the opposite? Why did they think red meat was going to worsen glucose and insulin and inflammation? Because of these low quality nutritional epidemiology studies that we've talked about before, that when you just take a big swath of people and just sort of follow how they live and crunch the data, and you find an association between eating more red meat and poor glucose control, higher insulin levels, more incidence of type 2 diabetes, and higher inflammation, you can't prove it has anything to do with the meat itself. It likely has to do, especially given the low hazard ratios, it likely has to do with healthy user bias and confounding variables. That's more likely. So those epidemiology studies aren't meant to draw conclusions. They're meant to bring up hypotheses that need to be tested. And that's exactly what these randomized controlled trials are designed to do. So this study that we wrote about at dietdoctor.com combined a number of different randomized controlled trials and did a meta-analysis on them. And like I said, they found that those who ate more red meat actually improved their glucose, improved their insulin, and certainly had no worsening of their inflammatory markers. And that goes along with many of the low-carb studies we've seen. Now, interestingly, these trials were not low-carb. Right? These trials were just red meat in general, but take that one step further and apply that same concept to a number of the low carb trials that we have that we feature on our website. And it shows that eating low carb with no restrictions on red meat is a wonderful way to control blood sugar, to lower insulin, and in many cases, even to lower inflammation. So my hat's off to these authors for admitting their biases and their hypotheses, following through with the data, using the higher level of evidence, and showing their conclusions. And this also goes along with, since we're talking about red meat, the other studies that we featured at dietdoctor.com, number of studies published in Annals in Internal Medicine, I guess the end of last year, showing that when you look at the grade evidence, GRADE as all in capitals, basically the quality of the studies, that the only studies supporting the harms of red meat are very low quality studies. Again, not something that we should be basing necessarily scientific consensus on when it's that low quality. We also have a thorough guide to red meat, which goes through all of this. So if there's still any confusion in your mind about red meat, go to dietdoctor.com, look for our red meat guide, read this post about the study, because as we're seeing more and more evidence, the higher quality evidence shows that red meat by itself is not dangerous. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hope this was helpful. Have a great day.